Hello, this is Matt Pullen, the guy who makes those chess videos on YouTube. I would just like to thank the people who commented me and sent me messages. I'm glad you like my videos. Sorry I don't have time to make more of them. I've been real busy at work, but I think it is time now. So let's go into the 4 knights game. Starts e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. You can reach this position many ways. And a move that a lot of your opponents will play here is they will put the bishop on c4. It looks like a logical move. It prepares castling, it develops another piece, it puts pressure on the weak square f7. And a normal move to black for many would be to play like bishop e7 or bishop c5, something like that, and just complete your own development and prepare to castle. But black is always going to be a move behind in those situations. I'm going to talk in this video about the possibilities for black after knight takes e4. This is called the fork trick, and it comes up in many openings where white has a knight on c3 and a bishop on c4, not just the 4 knights game. So there are 3 basic options here. One is to take the knight, the obvious knight takes e4. Another one is to play bishop takes f7, and also the gambit after castles. If knight takes, the idea of the fork trick is to win back the piece for a pawn by playing pawn to d5, which forks the knight on e4, the bishop on c4. So black is going to get back a piece for a pawn. And the exchange of pieces and central pawns, black will have the only pawn left on e5 in the center. And he is trying to prove equality. So we'll look at 3 moves quickly for white. Let's look at bishop takes pawn, giving back the piece right away. After queen takes, knight c3, white has given up the bishop pair, but he's gaining some tempo and making the black queen move around a bit. So I recommend queen a5 in this line, although queen d8 is also possible. So that after castles you play bishop to g4, preparing the queenside castle for black. So that's a sample line after bishop takes pawn. Bishop d3 protecting the knight on e4 is also seen. You gotta take the knight after bishop takes. Bishops don't really like to be on the center 4 squares like this because f5 is coming. Not right away, of course, because if f5 then bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and knight takes pawn. White wins a pawn and ruins black's structure on the queen side. Sure, black could pin the knight to the king with queen e7, but after castles the knight is not takeable because rook e1 and black loses the queen. So instead, black should just develop with bishop d6, preparing castles, etc., followed by f5 attacking the bishop. This trade is not such a big deal because e5 is not hanging. Black will just follow up by playing c5, bishop b7, queen moves somewhere, and castles either way. So after this move, black's plan is just a castle, but let's say white plays d4 in order to upset that plan and open up the center. Well, after knight takes and pawn takes, queen takes, g7 is hanging. Black protects this by castling, and now castling for white would be a mistake, because after bishop takes h2 check, the king takes and black wins. So instead, white would need to develop to protect his queen, and then black just plays queen e7, preparing to gain another tempo with bishop e5. Pawn structure is symmetrical, each side has 2 bishops. Nobody has an advantage here. So bishop d3 also leads to equality. Bishop b5 is quite sharp, but bad if black knows what to do. The idea is to set up a counter threat, because after pawn takes, knight takes e5 is possible because the knight is pinned. And bishop d7, bishop takes, no matter which way black takes, he'll lose the bishop pair and he'll end up with crippled pawns on the queen side. For instance, this way or this way. They're the same thing. So instead, they teach you not to move your queen out too early, but the correct move here is actually queen g5, because there's a hanging pawn, a hanging knight, a hanging bishop. If knight takes, then queen takes bishop is fine, because then this knight has to run away and lose time. So, d4 is a better move. It protects the knight and attacks the queen with the bishop on c1. Queen takes g2 is forced, threatening to take the rook for check, so you gotta move the rook to f1. And now you just play bishop d6. It looks like something terrible is happening on c6. After knight takes knight, you don't take, because then you lose a rook. Instead, you play this little move a6, and now the knight can have a discovered check, but there's nothing useful to capture or threaten with the knight. Any knight move, I just take the bishop. So bishop has to drop back, and then bishop d7, black is winning because white is going to lose one of these, and the kingside situation for white is very critical. So that is what you play if they play bishop to b5. Now also, after the fork trick, white does not need to take on e4. White can play bishop takes f7, a move a lot of players use because it prevents black from castling. Still, after d5, knight eg5 check, the king goes back to g8. Even though the king is displaced on g8, preventing the rook on h8 from developing normally, it's actually quite safe there. And black has a lot of long-term prospects. He has control of the center with pawns on e5 and d5, and he has the bishop pair. And one of white's knights, the knight on g5, is going to have to move again very soon after bishop e7. So bishop takes on f7 looks scary, but it's not a problem for black. Another line is castles. It's a gambit. After knight d6 is a very good move here, but this is also playable. Knight takes knight, d takes, opening up lines in the center. And then black needs to be very careful how he plays this. If d6, for instance, then knight to g5, and f7 is impossible to guard correctly. f6 is a move which prevents knight g5 and also protects on e5, but then knight h4, followed by f4, opening up the position, is very dangerous for black. The correct way to play here is to play the bishop to e7, and queen d5 threatens mate, but I suggest just giving up the pawn and reaching equality for black after a subsequent c6 and d5. Well, those are some ideas in the 4 knights game for black after the fork trick. I hope to see you next time.